It was a calm Sunday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, the kind where the sun gently kissed the water of the private pools in the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Birds chirped in the distance, the breeze swayed the palm trees, and everything felt like it belonged in a movie. In one of those pristine gated communities, behind a sleek, modern mansion with glass walls and marble walkways, a black man sat quietly by his pool. Wearing loose linen pants, sunglasses, and holding a cup of fresh lemonade, he looked every bit like someone who had earned his peace. But that peace was about to be interrupted not by a storm, but by suspicion, entitlement, and ignorance. The man's name was Cameron Blake. At 42, he was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country. A self-made millionaire, Cameron had built everything from the ground up, starting in a cramped apartment, coding through sleepless nights, and never once asking for a handout. Today, his company employed over 900 people, his face had graced magazines, and his voice echoed in boardrooms across the world. But none of that seemed to matter when two of his new neighbors spotted him sitting alone near his pool and assumed the worst. "Excuse me, sir," the woman's voice called from behind the gate. "Are you supposed to be here?" Cameron looked up, puzzled. The woman and the man beside her, both white and dressed like they were heading to a golf club, were standing stiffly at the edge of his driveway. He'd seen them before, passing glances during HOA meetings, a polite wave when packages were dropped at the wrong address. But this was different. Their body language was tense. Their faces held that look that said you don't belong. He set his lemonade down and stood up, walking calmly toward them, towel over his shoulder. "Yes," he replied with a relaxed smile. "I live here," the man scoffed. "Really?" "Because we've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years and we've never seen you before." Cameron blinked. "Well, I just bought this place 6 months ago. I travel a lot for work." The woman crossed her arms. "You sure you're not a friend of the owner? Or ... the pool guy maybe? That one hit different." Cameron tilted his head slightly, the smile fading just enough to show the sting. But he didn't lash out. He'd learned a long time ago that in moments like these, silence said more than shouting ever could. "No," he said softly. "I own this home. I'm Cameron Blake." They paused. The name didn't seem to register, or maybe it did, but they didn't want to believe it. Instead of backing off, the man pulled out his phone. "Look, we're not trying to be rude, but you have to admit this looks suspicious. We've had break-ins in the past. I think we should call someone, just to be safe." Cameron let out a slow breath. He glanced over at the house he'd poured millions into renovating, the palm trees he'd chosen, the pool he'd designed, the land he'd worked so hard to afford. And yet, in their eyes, he was still a question mark. He could have raised his voice, he could have gotten angry. But instead, he nodded and turned away, calmly walking back to the lounge chair. That's when the woman made the call. Within minutes, a black-and-white police cruiser rolled up the smooth pavement. 2 officers stepped out, hands on belts, eyes alert. Cameron remained seated, hands resting on his knees. He knew how these things went. He'd lived through worse. But something inside him stirred this time. Not rage, not fear, just a deep, heavy disappointment. And yet ... he had a plan. The officers approached, greeted the couple who pointed toward Cameron. One of them, a younger cop, walked over. "Sir," he said, "can I see some ID?" Cameron looked up, not with hostility but a strange, calm confidence. "Sure," he replied, reaching over to the small table beside his chair. But instead of just handing over his driver's license, he pulled out a leather wallet ... with a platinum business card resting inside. Embossed in gold letters, it read, "Cameron Blake, CEO, Nexon Technologies." The officer blinked. Then again, his partner leaned over, eyes widening. They recognized the name now. They'd seen it on the news. The man who had just signed a $280 million deal with the National Cybersecurity Agency. The same man who donated to inner-city schools and sponsored tech scholarships for minority students. The officer cleared his throat, stepping back slightly. "I apologize, sir. Just routine check." "You understand." Cameron gave a short nod. "Of course. I'd just suggest next time, maybe ask the people calling why they're so quick to assume." The couple stood frozen, the color drained from their faces. And that's when Cameron stood, stretched his arms casually, and walked toward them. "Tell you what," he said, voice steady, Since you're new neighbors, maybe we should get to know each other better. I'm hosting a tech industry mixer next Friday. Some big names will be here. I'll make sure your names are on the list. The man swallowed hard. Thank you, but we might be out of town. Cameron nodded again. Right. Of course you will. As the officers left and the couple walked off awkwardly, Cameron sat back down and picked up his lemonade. But the story didn't end there. Because what happened next would shake not just the neighborhood but make headlines across the country. See, Cameron didn't just turn the tables with a business card. He had a bigger plan in mind, one that would expose how deep the assumptions ran. And it all started with a single phone call to a local reporter. But before we reveal that, let's switch scenes for a moment. A few miles away, in the heart of the city, a young black teen sat in the back of a crowded bus. His name was Malik, 17 years old, high school senior, basketball captain, and known for always doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. The bus was packed, standing room only. People were tired, frustrated, trying to get home. That's when a pregnant woman stepped on board, holding her belly, her face flushed from the heat. No one moved, except Malik. Without hesitation, he stood up, tapped her shoulder gently, and offered her his seat. She smiled, thankful, and sat down slowly. A few minutes passed, the bus bumped along its route. Then, quietly, she reached into her purse and passed Malik a folded piece of paper. He looked at her, confused. She only smiled and said, "Read it when you get home." That note would change Malik's life forever. And somehow, just somehow, his story would intersect with Cameron's, in a way no one saw coming. The bus rattled on through the city, bouncing slightly over potholes and sudden breaks. Malik held the folded note in his hand, still warm from the woman's touch. His heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but curiosity. Something about her smile had been different, not just a simple thank you smile, but one filled with something deeper, like she knew something he didn't. He tucked the note into the front pocket of his hoodie, deciding to wait until he got home. His stop was only 2 blocks away. The air outside was cooling down, summer slowly giving way to fall. Streetlights flickered on one by one as he walked the familiar path to the small apartment he shared with his mom and little sister. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and a heater that made too much noise, but it was home. His mom was working the late shift again. She cleaned offices downtown and always left a plate of food on the stove for him. Malik warmed it up, ate in silence, and glanced at the clock. 9:42 p.m. He pulled the note from his hoodie and sat down at the tiny kitchen table, the one with one leg always wobbling. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat, soft curls and long lines, like someone who took their time with their words. "You stood up when no one else did. That means something. My husband and I are in a position to help young people like you. If you're interested in something bigger, something life-changing, call this number tomorrow. Lena Blake." Below it, a phone number. No more details, no promises, no clues. Just a sense that his life had somehow shifted. He read the note 3 times, then again, and stared at the name. Blake. It didn't mean much to him at first, but something about it stuck. Meanwhile, back in the quiet suburb where Cameron lived, things weren't as peaceful as they looked. After the pool incident, the story hadn't faded away quietly. In fact, it did the opposite. One of the officers offended by the entitled behavior he had witnessed leaked the body cam footage to a journalist he trusted. The video showed Cameron calmly sitting by his own pool while being questioned, and then the stunned reactions of the officers once they realized who he was. It didn't take long for the clip to go viral. News outlets picked it up within 24 hours. Millionaire black CEO harassed outside his own home, the headlines read. Social media exploded. People from across the country shared the story, frustrated, inspired, divided. Some praised Cameron for handling it with class. Others couldn't believe this kind of profiling still happened in such wealthy neighborhoods. But for Cameron, it wasn't about the attention. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want fame. What he wanted was accountability and maybe even a conversation. Because he knew this wasn't just about him. It never was. He started thinking bigger. What if this story could do more than spark a trending hashtag? What if it could lead to something real, change, access, opportunity? That's when Lena, his wife, mentioned the boy on the bus stop. She told him about Malik, about how he stood up without hesitation, gave up his seat when no one else would, and did it without expecting anything in return. That kind of character couldn't be taught in books or bought with money. It was rare. It was honest. And it reminded Cameron of himself at that age, quiet, observant, always trying to do the right thing even when the world seemed set against him. Cameron leaned back in his chair, thinking, maybe the best response to ignorance wasn't just exposure, it was investment. Not just in conversations, but in people. And maybe Malik was the first step, but Malik didn't know any of this. He didn't know who Lena Blake was. He didn't know the last name he read on that note belonged to the same man who had just been at the center of a national controversy. All he knew was that someone saw him. Someone believed he was worth more than just another kid trying to make it. The next morning, he sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, debating. He'd never called a stranger like this before. What if it was a prank? What if it wasn't real? What if he got his hopes up for nothing? But still, he dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm voice answered. Hello, this is Lena. Hi. This is Malik, from the bus yesterday. You gave me a note. There was a pause, then a smile in her voice. I was hoping you'd call. I'd like to invite you and your mother to lunch. My husband and I would love to meet you, both. That's when the threads started to pull together, two very different worlds inching closer, connected by quiet acts of integrity. Malik had no idea he was stepping into something much bigger than a lunch invite. As the weekend approached, cameras were still flashing around Cameron's home. Journalists camped outside, some genuinely interested, others just hungry for sound bites. Cameron mostly stayed inside, letting the storm pass, but behind the scenes, he was preparing. Not just statements for the press, but a new foundation, one aimed at providing mentorship and opportunity for young men like Malik. He was done waiting for systems to change. He wanted to build his own, but not everyone was happy with the way things were unfolding. In the neighborhood Facebook group, a small thread of angry comments had begun to form. Some residents felt unfairly portrayed, others called it a media stunt. One post even suggested that Cameron had staged the encounter. The same people who had once smiled politely at him now whispered behind closed doors. Cameron saw the comments. He saved the screenshots. But he didn't respond. Not yet. He believed in something else, timing. And soon, that time would come, because unknown to the people around him, Cameron had invited several reporters to a private press event, one that would reveal everything. His story, the silent profiling in upscale communities. The countless other professionals of color who had similar experiences but lacked a platform. He wasn't just telling his story. He was collecting others. And he planned to hand over something that no one expected. But just before all that, he was going to meet a teenager who unknowingly reminded him why this fight mattered. Malik had no idea who was waiting at that lunch table. He just knew that something was changing. He felt it in his chest. And when he stepped into that quiet restaurant, dressed in his best shirt, with his mother nervously holding her purse, his entire world was about to be flipped upside down. ChatGPT said. Malik stepped into the restaurant slowly, the kind of place he'd only seen from the outside. The lights were soft and warm, the walls lined with quiet music and framed photographs that probably cost more than the rent his mom paid each month. He shifted nervously, tugging at the collar of his shirt. His mother, Kaisha, stood beside him, gripping her purse tightly, eyes darting around like she wasn't sure if they'd made a mistake by showing up. A hostess approached, smiling politely. You must be Malik and Ms. Kaisha, right this way. They followed her through a row of tables until they reached a private corner booth. Sitting there was Lena Blake, wearing a simple blouse and pearls, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She stood immediately and reached out, her smile sincere. I'm so glad you both came, she said. Kaisha gave a small, polite smile, but Malik could tell she was still unsure. They sat down slowly. Lena waved to a server and ordered something simple for everyone. Then, with a gentle voice, she leaned forward. I wanted you to meet someone. He'll be here in just a few minutes. Before they could ask who, the sound of polished shoes against the floor drew their attention. Malik turned and saw a tall man walking toward them. He had a clean-cut beard, confident steps, and eyes that looked sharp even behind his designer glasses. Malik had seen his face before on a magazine cover once at the grocery store. Wait, Malik blinked. You're Cameron Blake. Cameron gave a small smile and extended his hand. That's me. And you're Malik. I've heard a lot about you. The room felt like it paused for a moment. Malik shook his hand, trying to keep cool, but the truth was he didn't know what to say. He never imagined this was where his day would take him. Cameron sat beside Lena and looked at both Malik and his mom with a calm seriousness. I know this is a little unexpected, but I believe in moments that lead to something greater. What you did on that bus, that was more than just being polite. It showed who you are when no one's looking. Kaisha finally spoke, her voice cautious but firm. We appreciate the kindness, Mr. Blake, but I have to ask, why us? Cameron looked at her with respect. Because I've lived a life where the world constantly asked me to prove I belonged. Because every time someone tried to put me in a box, I decided to break the box completely. And because now that I'm in a position to reach back and lift someone up, I'd rather give that chance to someone who's already shown they deserve it. He paused, then added, but this isn't charity. It's an opportunity, one that has to be earned. The words lingered. Malik nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. But behind the warmth of this meeting, things outside the room were shifting. Back in Cameron's neighborhood, more friction was building. The couple who had called the police, Matthew and Diane Hargrave, were beginning to feel the social consequences of their actions. Friends started keeping their distance. Invitations were quietly canceled. A few neighbors sent passive-aggressive messages like, "Hope things settle down soon." But worse than the isolation was the fear of something else, legal action. They'd heard rumors that Cameron was preparing to speak publicly, that his legal team was reviewing footage, that a lawsuit for defamation or profiling might be coming, and suddenly, the incident that had felt like a harmless misunderstanding began to feel like a very real threat to their reputations and possibly their careers. Matthew worked in finance, Diane sat on the PTA board of a nearby private school. Neither could afford a public scandal. They met quietly with a local HOA member, trying to get ahead of it. He's turning this into a circus, Diane complained. We didn't do anything wrong. We were just looking out for the neighborhood. The HOA member, a woman named Rachel, raised an eyebrow. Did you ever ask yourself why you assumed he didn't belong? Neither had a good answer. That conversation didn't end the way they expected. Meanwhile, Cameron's press event was getting closer, but it wasn't going to be a flashy conference or a revenge-driven statement. It was being carefully planned to reveal patterns, stories from other Black professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives, all who had faced similar treatment in affluent spaces. Some of the testimonies were heartbreaking. A surgeon mistaken for hospital staff. A judge questioned while entering her own courtroom. A pilot pulled aside because someone thought he looked too young to fly a commercial plane. Cameron wanted the world to hear them, and he wanted to use the attention on his story to elevate theirs. But Malik's role was evolving, too. Cameron had asked him to be part of a youth mentorship pilot program, a test run for something much larger. But Malik was still unsure. He didn't know how to move between the world he came from and the one Cameron was offering. Back at school, Malik's friends started asking questions. Where had he been over the weekend? Why was he wearing new sneakers? Who was picking him up in that sleek black car? Some supported him. Others didn't. Don't forget where you come from, one friend said, almost like a warning. That line stuck with Malik, because while doors were opening, he felt pressure from both sides to rise up but not rise too far. His mom noticed it, too. She tried to stay positive, but deep down she feared what might happen if it all fell apart. What if this was just temporary? What if they got used to the idea of hope, only to have it pulled away? And in the background, Malik had no idea that Lena was quietly tracking something else. The woman from the bus had noticed how he reacted to pressure. His kindness wasn't just a one-time act, it was part of who he was. She was already speaking with school counselors, looking into scholarships, and exploring programs that could put Malik in front of more decision-makers. But she also knew the world wouldn't go easy on him just because a few doors opened. At the same time, a local reporter began digging deeper into Cameron's story. She wasn't just interested in the viral clip, she was curious about the neighbors, their social media posts, their public records, even their ties to a local real estate firm that had been quietly flagged for discrimination complaints. She hadn't approached Cameron yet, but she was planning to. And what she was uncovering could turn a personal story into a citywide scandal. Cameron, unaware of her digging, was focused on building trust with Malik, building a stronger response to the media, building a network of voices ready to speak the truth. But just beneath the surface, pressure was rising from every angle. And the moment where everything would collide, Malik's choices, Cameron's message, the neighborhood's secrets, was coming fast. The day of the press event finally arrived, and the tension in the city felt heavier than usual. The air was warm, but not comforting, thick with curiosity, judgment, and quiet anger that had been building for days. Outside the venue, reporters gathered early, setting up cameras, checking microphones, and whispering among themselves about what Cameron Blake might reveal. Some expected a public apology from the neighborhood association. Others whispered about lawsuits, secret recordings, or deeper scandals waiting to be exposed. Inside the building, the atmosphere was calmer but not quiet. Cameramen moved between rows, setting up shots while production assistants hurried back and forth with schedules. The event hall wasn't massive, but it was enough to feel important. High ceilings, polished floors, and rows of neatly arranged chairs filled with educators, business leaders, and students. On the front row, Malik sat between his mother and Lena, eyes wide, heart pounding. He was wearing a pressed shirt and a navy blazer Cameron had given him just the night before. He kept adjusting the cuffs, unsure of whether he looked confident or just nervous. Cameron hadn't arrived yet. But everyone knew this was more than a speech, it was a stand. And Malik, he was a part of it now, even if he didn't fully understand how big this moment was. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Matthew and Diane Hargraves sat inside their home, glued to their TV. They hadn't been invited to the event, but they knew they were part of the story. In the past few days, they'd faced more than just side eyes. From neighbors, Diane had been asked to step down from the PTA board. Matthew's firm had received multiple angry emails from clients referencing the viral incident. And even though no lawsuits had been filed yet, they were nervous, not because they were innocent but because they weren't. Back at the venue, Cameron finally stepped into the building through a side entrance, wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, eyes focused. His assistant walked beside him, handing over a final draft of his speech, but Cameron barely looked at it. His mind was already elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about what he'd say, he was thinking about how many people needed to hear it. Right before stepping onto the stage, he paused and glanced at Malik. Their eyes met, and Malik nodded. No words were needed. Cameron walked up, the room slowly falling silent as he reached the podium. Cameras clicked, phones lit up. The live stream ticked upward in viewership by the second. He began slowly, his voice calm and steady. "A few weeks ago," he said, "I was sitting in my backyard, by my pool, at my own home when someone called the police on me. Not because I did something wrong, not because I was causing harm, but because I looked like someone who didn't belong." The room stayed still, hanging on every word. "I've spent my life working hard, building a business, creating jobs, and giving back, but still, to some people, that isn't enough to prove I'm allowed to exist in peace." He paused, letting the silence speak. "But this isn't just about me." Cameron stepped aside slightly, motioning toward a screen behind him. A video began to play, clips of people telling their stories. A black female judge talking about being stopped outside her courthouse. A Hispanic engineer mistaken for a delivery man. An Asian American doctor asked to leave a luxury hotel lobby while waiting for her car. The stories rolled on, one after another, voices trembling, eyes filled with frustration and pain. It wasn't just one moment, it was years of them. As the video ended, the room stayed silent. Some wiped away tears. Others looked down, ashamed or thoughtful. Cameron stepped back to the mic. These stories are not rare. They are repeated, silently, daily, and they are ignored until someone catches it on video. But what if we didn't wait for the footage? What if we built something before the damage was done? He took a breath. That's why today, I'm launching the Belong Foundation. Its mission is simple: mentorship, scholarships, legal aid, and training programs to help underrepresented voices not just survive in these spaces but lead in them. And I'm proud to say, our first scholar is sitting right there in the front row. Malik froze, his heart jumping. Cameras shifted toward him. Whispers moved through the room. His name is Malik Carter, Cameron continued. He didn't do something loud, he did something right. When the world was rushing around him, he noticed someone in need. And instead of looking away, he stood up. Malik sat frozen, his mother holding his hand tightly. But just as the applause began, something unexpected happened. A woman in the back of the room stood up and raised her voice. "Mr. Blake, why haven't you addressed the HOA emails?" The room turned sharply. The woman, Marissa Caldwell, a reporter for the local paper, stepped forward. "Emails from the HOA that warned you not to disturb the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The ones sent to your lawyer." Gasps scattered across the room. Cameron's jaw tensed. He hadn't planned to bring that part out today, but now it was here, raw and real. Malik leaned forward, trying to catch what was happening. His mother squeezed his arm. "Is it true," the reporter pressed, "that multiple neighbors signed a petition to have your home monitored after your arrival?" The silence in the room was deafening. Cameron looked down for a moment, then back up. "I wasn't going to talk about that today," he said, "but since it's been asked, yes. There were emails, there was a petition, and yes, I was advised to keep it quiet, but I won't anymore." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some applauded, some whispered, others, especially those who lived in Cameron's neighborhood, sat still, faces pale. "Because silence helps no one," he continued. "It protects comfort, not truth." Back at home, Matthew's phone buzzed over and over again, his inbox filled with messages. His social media began to flood. Screenshots of HOA documents were leaking online. It was spreading fast, and in the restaurant's parking lot where a separate watch party had been organized by community leaders, people began chanting. Not in anger, in unity, voices rising together with a simple message: "We belong here." But inside the event hall, Cameron wasn't done. He turned again to Malik. "You're going to face a lot of pressure, son, from people who want to hold you back, and even from those afraid of watching you rise. But you don't have to walk through that alone." Malik's throat felt dry. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but his voice caught. Then, someone else stood up, another student. Then another, teachers, a pastor, even a business owner. The room was slowly rising, voices supporting him, standing with him, but even as the room felt full of hope, outside the walls, the backlash was beginning. HOA members were denying knowledge of the emails. The real estate company tied to the petition started releasing statements. Old accusations began resurfacing. A lawsuit was now rumored to be on the table. And in the middle of it all, Cameron stood calmly, eyes sharp, ready for whatever came next. Because the climax wasn't just this event. It was what would happen once the world started listening.